Had this set for tomorrow, but apparently I was wrong. So this morning I was going to put together a couple of lines of pros and cons to help us along, but I guess we'll just have to do it manually this morning. So at the Board of Directors meeting, Board of Trustees meeting rather, the other day, the board asked us if we would get back together and try to begin to maybe fine tune our thinking a little bit. So we looked at this in a very broad base, and we know what we concluded from that. And so the board would ask us to come up with a, I guess effectively a list of pros and cons for each one, at least of the four that I've put on my agenda, which I assume you all have a copy of. And no doubt within those four, there will be subgroups from within that. So, excuse me. So when we looked at it originally, those were just the four that I could sort of zero in on it in the sort of 10,000 foot level. And so I still think we should go through the exercise of breaking all this down, but then finding out whether or not within any one of those four, or perhaps a fifth or a sixth or a seventh option for the operation of a fire department. Any questions so far, so that we can all sort of get off on the right track? Nope. Okay. All right. So what I tried to, actually this morning, what I was going to do is for tomorrow's meeting, I was going to just do a split sheet where we would come up with a pro and a con, and then I was going to list the four basic units that I had that I wrote down on the agenda, and then leave a couple of blank ones just so we could think about maybe some hybrid or something like that. And so ultimately, I suppose we'll put together some sort of a report and present it to the township board. So any questions so far? So I guess the first thing I would do is looking on the agenda item 740. So why don't we? Yes. Of course we can. Since you're getting, you can write on it too. Yeah. Yeah, no kidding. Well,
are you supposed to have a green light on yours?
Yeah, I just leave it on all the time.
But it times out.
Well, mine never did, but the battery must time out. So, all right. Why don't we start out with literally the very first one on the list is the disbanding the fire department. We shouldn't have too many pros to that, but literally if we just write pro and con on a piece of paper, and we can establish at least a direction that we feel as though we can take. This probably won't be a whole lot different than our original conversation of this, but let's commit it to writing, I guess. Can anybody come up with any pros to disbanding a fire department?
Saves a lots of money.
Yeah, there'd certainly be a significant savings that the township would realize. And of course, the opposite side of that con would be that the residents of the city of Alpena would be void of any fire protection.
Of the city of Alpena?
I'm sorry, excuse me, the township of Alpena. I believe there, at least as it's currently written, I believe that there has to be something.
So what you're saying is disband the fire department means absolutely no activity whatsoever. for fire suppression.
In my mind, that's what I was thinking, that it would be. In my mind. That's exactly, that's exactly what I was thinking.
No fire
in a-
department whatsoever.
Yep, in a worst case scenario, the property owners would be having to deal with something beyond us. Of course, the other con from would be there would be a significant increase in the cost of people's insurance. I suspect there would be a bit of some level of anxiety, I suppose. I suppose there'd be some level of anxiety amongst people.
Almost like social effects of the community.
And I honestly, from a pro standpoint, I really honestly can't think beyond a complete cost saving measure at the township level. I really can't think of any other benefits of not having a fire department.
My notes I wrote, save lots of money as the pro and everything else.
Yeah,
I
you
mean,
should come up with a pretty long list
right.
of negatives.
I don't think that's even an option. I mean,
No, it's not, but again, it's an exercise.
Right.
That we felt at least worthy of discussion.
I want to hear his input. What are your thoughts? I mean,
Oh, well, I'd end up being redundant.
is there,
Yeah, again, there was a period of time. The city was providing fire coverage for reached a point where township board residents
present moment? Sorry.
decided that what was coming from the city wasn't adequate, and then that started the whole process of the purchase of a truck and then a place to put it, and then a second truck, and then opening station, so on and so forth. So you essentially would be setting the clock back a bit as far as fire protection. So, and in this day and age, it's kind of hard to separate the need for EMS coverage from the need for fire coverage because departments do both. So,
Well, and that was the one thing that as well that medical first responding side of things is I suppose we should because I think by charter we have to offer medical, or by contract we have to offer medical first responders because that's part of the county's expectation of the municipality that's going to get countywide benefit, right?
Correct.
And so, I hadn't really, I suppose we can easily blend both fire services and medical first responding services into our thinking. Because it would necessitate that simply because the county requirements for that would, I suppose if we didn't have that, then I suppose in breach of some agreement somewhere, so we want to make sure that we stay as part of our, expectation of contract. So the other pro, I suppose we could come up with would be that those monies that would be saved without having a fire department would be put towards roads and other services that the township would otherwise have. And again, this is just sort of a noodling section. We're not coming up with any conclusion. We are just simply noodling, and hopefully we can put it into some sort of a spreadsheet or a PowerPoint or something, and put it towards, give it back to the township board. Chris, any thoughts on, and hit your mic, please. Like these batteries are toast. Yeah.
I mean, everything we've said, I would think even the pro is saving money, there's gonna be hidden costs, because if you still have to provide some kind of fire coverage or EMS coverage, you're gonna end up paying someone to do that for you.
Yeah,
one way or
that'll be on a
another.
different,
Well, even under disbanding the fire department, like, okay, but you're still gonna have to provide some level of fire coverage per the charter, some level of EMS response per the county stuff, for the EMS, for the county, whatever the wording, agreements. So, I mean, it, like, on the surface, it looks like, oh, we're gonna save the entire budget, it's great, but you'll probably lose your millages, because why would those residents support a millage for not having a fire department? And two, you're gonna have to pay someone something to provide whatever level of coverage that meets the requirements, so that money you're saving keeps going down and down the more you look at it on the surface. Like what Chad said, we're gonna save a ton of money on the surface, it looks like that, but I feel like there'd be a lot of hidden fees in there popping up, going, oh yeah, we gotta pay for this now, we got it. So even that pro is gonna go down even a little bit, is how I feel.
Okay.
You mentioned, costing to our residents. Would that, is there anything that would affect as the township governmental in our insurance needs?
Well, I suppose it would trickle down to the cost of the insurance on these buildings, and it would really be more of a property issue than anything else. It wouldn't boil down to any. I suppose if we just disbanded it, it's probably reasonable to assume that we would get some litigation filed, so.
Well, and how are you gonna attract any business? Nobody's gonna wanna put any structures up, if you don't have any fire service.
That's right.
Especially the big box stores, they pay lots of money for insurances and things like, for their fire protection services, even in their own buildings. And if their stuff changes, that might even make them close their doors and move somewhere else that's
Well,
cheaper.
certainly could, and economic development
Mhm.
could certainly be impacted. So let's, unless there's nothing else on that one, let's just keep sort of moving along. The next one that I had on the agenda had operated by a not-for-profit or a for-profit fire department.
We've discussed that too, but there's not many of them left in the entire country. I think in our county, Hubbard Lake is the only private.
There's several, actually.
East Grand Lake isn't, aren't they?
East
They're
Grand
are they
Lake
private?
Fire
Presqu'île
Department,
County, but
uh,
yeah, East Grand Lake, which is Presqu'île number 2, I think.
the irony of not-for-profit fire departments in Michigan is most of them are located in northeastern Michigan. There's virtually none in other areas of the state. They can be run very, very effectively. But the pro would be that we would have fire services. You know, that would be one of the pros. And so, another pro, depending upon how it's structured, I suppose, is that the cost of a volunteer, actually, you could probably have both you could have a hybrid easily of a non-for-profit. You could have, like, East Grand Lake has a full-time fire person as well as a host of volunteers. And so you could probably pretty easily hybrid something like that, but that would be up to whoever operated it, whether it was.
How are those funded? Through a contract, still a millage?
Typically through either just a fire millage or part of the general fund. And so typically their cost of doing business is much less, but there are a few around here. I can think of South Shore. I can think of East Grand Lake. I believe there is let's see, where's another one? Like Chris said, they really are becoming a bit of a dinosaur because one of the cons is that you don't have levels of immunity that you would otherwise have as a governmental entity. So the fire department, as well as its members, would have to rely upon whatever the laws are governing not-for-profit fire departments, which would give a lesser degree of governmental immunity, which is a.
When somebody's
would be a
house
bit of a
burns
problem.
down, you want some immunity to say they can't blame you for it.
Well,
It was their own doing, and-
even worse than that would be maybe doing some medical first
Or
responding. when somebody gets
especially the medical
seriously-
side with all the liabilities there.
Yeah, because you're going to go above the Good Samaritan laws,
Mhm.
and you're going to have an expectation that I've been adequately trained and that I know at least enough until ALS can show up.
Mhm.
So the immunity issue to me can be a pretty big deal. And that's probably one of the reasons why you start to see some of these organizations just sort of folding into the township. We know that Presqu'île District 2 was a worst case scenario of things that could go wrong, that did go wrong, and as a result of that going wrong, that fire department was completely closed, and that translated into some anxiety amongst its residents. Sure, there was some cost of their insurance went up. And once that started to roll back into place, then that benefit starts to come back into place. But I don't know, one of the issues that we're all faced with, whether it would be not-for-profit or for-profit, is the difficulty in finding qualified, finding anybody willing to do it.
Yeah.
You know, just a con can be
Someone who want to start it, and do it,
Finding volunteers.
or someone who wants to even start the nonprofit.
Well, yeah.
And do the nonprofit. Because I think you need a board, don't you, for a nonprofit? You can't just be one entity doing it. You gotta have a full board and.
Yeah, you got, you gotta have.
The other thing that ended up happening was the township, if they had been farmed, the township would be right back to be really responsible, so.
Well,
And where's-
very much like exactly what happened at District Two. Ultimately, the decision was made at the township level to run it themselves. So basically, prior to that, the township of Presqu'île, or Presqu'île Township would have funded that fire department. And that fire department, in theory, would provide reports back to the funding mechanism. And if that funding mechanism isn't paying close enough attention, then things go south, and when things go south, then somebody's got to step in. And that took a period of time to reopen that place. And in the meantime, that equipment starts to go bad. So startup costs, that can be an issue because the township is still going to fund those startup costs.
I think just the
Personnel.
oversight too of, you have government funding flowing into a business. So now you have to have that oversight
Yeah,
from the township side and from their side. So that's added responsibilities for.
Mhm.
You probably have to make a committee to look to oversight that, make sure they're not misspending, misappropriating.
I don't think in either scenario, whether it would be a for-profit or a not-for-profit, I don't think ISO, the Insurance Services Office, would downgrade the fire protection, at least in what we would consider to be the urban area. So Alpena Township has essentially two fire ratings. They have a fire rating, and Chief, step in if you would, please. But the class 6 fire protection 5.6, I think we're actually technically a 5A, I think.
We're a 5.5Y.
Okay, so the 5 and 5Y, the 5Y is the new way of basically saying anybody who's more than 5 miles from a responding, from an adequate water supply and a responding fire department falls into the higher rated categories. So if you're living out on Long Lake or down Bloom Road or anywhere where there really isn't any reliable water sources. And Long Lake, by the way, would not be considered a reliable water source, primarily because in the wintertime, kind of hard to get at it. And so that's where every once in a while you'll see dry hydrants that are sort of stuck out of the creek. That's typically where they get that water. So anyway, in the urban area, right around this, right.
Water system.
Yeah, well, within the water system or within 5 miles of a
Station.
responding fire department, right?
5 miles of the station or 5 mi, or so many feet
Yeah.
from a hydrant. I think that's in feet for the hydrants.
Yeah, I don't know about that, but anyway, like where I live, I'm in a class 6, where anybody who's sort of just right around the hub, right around the edge of the city of Alpena, which where the township would all be a 6. Anybody beyond that starts to become what I would always refer to as an 8, but is now a 5Y. And so it's not likely that even if it was a volunteer fire department, fully volunteer, paid on call, that it would have any impact on the insurance costs, primarily because of all the other criteria that goes into it. And so another pro, I suppose, would be that it would have little, if any, impact on the cost of insurance.
Just by chance, has there ever been an actual audit that has know geographically the areas that would say, I mean, have we ever actually done like a survey to say, well, this area would be within 5 miles or not, and these are the ones,
Have we had an ISO audit
does
lately?
that come with an ISO?
I know the city had an ISO audit a couple years ago, but did they do the same? Okay, yeah, so we've had ISO audits come in and they tell us where deficiencies are, where we can improve and what our current
Does
status or
anybody have a-
number is.
anybody have a copy of that?
I do. Matter of fact, I think I got it in there. But it's rather thorough.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you that there were very few deficiencies, for lack of a better phrase. The areas I recall that was a little bit of a, and I mean a small chink, was I don't think we had a training officer. That was a deficiency. There were very few.
The biggest rate become major infrastructure, increasing.
Oh, it gets ridiculous when you want to get to a 1 or a 2. Like I think, don't quote me, but I don't even know if New York and Chicago are ones. They might even
Chicago,
be
I think,
2.
is still a one.
They might be ones, but you've got to have I know ISO, there's full-time staff is a little boost. It's not a massive boost, but it is a little boost. The how much hydrant you have, how many gallons per
Proximity.
minute total, all of your apparatus together can pump. And when you're talking the big cities, they have, I'll make up on like 10,000 gallon per minute boats in their harbor that they can pump, so that's why they can get those higher levels. But when you're talking,
They've got a fire department every 8 feet.
yep, and you got like every mile, you've got 2 fire stations along their way. So that's how they get the really low numbers. And that's just not financially feasible for our population
We
base
would
to
never
even,
get there. Never's a long time, but we would.
because you almost have to have that density of population to make that happen. Because or else we would have to have 10 fire stations that don't do anything because there's only 2 houses in between each one.
And I guess that's exactly where I was kind of going with, you have, a percentage of how we're distributing this would affect.
I'm sorry, would you say that again, please?
That's okay. That I was just curious, is the reason why I was asking is have a certain amount of percentage of individuals throughout with our geographic area that this would affect. Like, where is the biggest population this would affect and not?
Well,
'Cause
Well,
what
if
I
you
heard
take- if
what I
you
heard
take the
say, there's like
south-
some, depending on where you are geographically.
yeah,
It
where
would,
you're gonna probably find where the rating goes to a 5Y is probably more north of here. Because water distribution systems on the south side are significantly better. And
Worth
so-
Road, after the tracks at Worth Road, or after Hobbs, I think it turns at Hobbs.
Yeah.
That turns into your 5Y area on the south side, and then, because I think it goes all the way down to Tim, so all 23 is covered, and
Yeah, all of 23, but then you've got to get,
your area, Ms.
We
Banks,
still have-
is probably your 5Y because there's no hydrants past the Lafarge plant. So all of the North Shore area, and then north of that, all the way up to the county line. It stops at
Right.
stops at the water tower there, so everything from here up.
so this would still be considered 5 right here.
But
Because of the station.
Because, yeah, and then you draw
5
a
miles.
5-mile circle around the stations, those would still be lower numbers, so progressively bigger as you go radiate out from the station.
I guess I'd like to know what that extended population is. that we're talking about.
It's at least that's what the count that counts.
Yeah.
It doesn't it doesn't necessarily have to do with density of population, but it's reasonable to connect the dots. Because that's where people are going to concentrate for the most part.
Should we table this to maybe our next meeting and keep on the agenda? Like I'm
It would be
just
something that I
thinking,
would like.
we're going down a rabbit hole, I'm
Yeah.
thinking, so if we want to maybe put that on the agenda for next meeting, we can go into
Yeah,
that
if-
more.
if I can find that and I have the whole report. I just don't have it. I guess I don't have it with me. It's not exactly stimulating reading, but nonetheless.
The moral, that there's many aspects they look at to make up the ISO number, however they do that exactly, but they have a formula and there's. Like I know we did last fall, we went to the college and we did what they call a tanker shuttle test or exercise, where all the different departments in the county brought their tankers and we ran water per minute, they calculated it, and so that improved everyone's ISO who was involved in that. We were told it was a
911
point, we got an extra point out of it, but and it's probably still in process, and how paperwork gets pushed and.
Yeah, just so you guys are aware, when they come in and do ISO, you want to call it a study or audit, it's not just the fire department.
Right.
They look at the whole community and that includes infrastructure as far as your water distribution. They look at what type of 911 system you have set up, and they do fire department as a part of it, that it's not just the fire department. And as Steve said earlier, prior to, I think 2 years ago, we were using 5/8. They redefined those parameters. Now they're considered a 5/5 wide. Basically means the same. One of the recommendations they had was that we could improve our rating more rural area by being certified in shuttle operations. So that's one of the classes that at the college put on, and that's where we had the regional representative from ISO came up and actually oversaw the class, and then at the accumulation of the class, we actually had to demonstrate the ISO that under time circumstances that establish a particular flow of water within so many minutes of a fire, and tankers and shuttle it back and forth and maintain that for a period of time. There's additional paperwork and things that have to be completed period of time before that will take place. But that is one of the things we did try to improve.
Right.
The ISO rating for the township in particular. And the good thing about having a class at the college is any of the departments in the area that participated, because of the mutual aid agreement stuff, would benefit from that. So in other words, by doing the study, for us, we weren't the only ones that benefited from it. For instance, Maple Ridge, Sanborn, whoever participated, Fresh Steel, all benefited.
So just so you also know, as Chris said, an ISO rating 1 is the very best you can get, and a 10 is the worst that you can get. So, and I don't necessarily personally think of it as a worst and best. I just think of it as just a number. Historically speaking, we've got pretty good fire services around here, and so like Chief said, there are a myriad of things that go into it, and all of those myriad of things would play into whether we disbanded the fire department or whether we had an authority. So they'll all play into it. And so moving along on this, so on the not-for-profit and profit, we actually could easily go that it could have that there would be little impact on the ISO rating, but we can also go, it could reduce our ISO rating because if we have if the system, if the operations of the fire department, notwithstanding water supplies, notwithstanding 9/11, notwithstanding mutual aid, all of that, if we just can't provide the manpower, it will eventually have an impact. So the fact of the matter is ISO would wait a year before they reestablished it. So for a year, we would go along knowing what we know, and then in a year, they would come back in and redo the whole system again. And would say, based upon these findings, we're gonna do X and then go from there. And so the risk, the definite risk to the property owner would be that I won't know really whether or not this has been a benefit to me for at least a year. So that's the downside to that.
That,
Cost of ISO?
No,
No.
insurance carriers.
that just
foot
brought up
that
a
bill.
Big con for this. So you're hiring an outside entity that you have no control over. So really, the ISO and the cost of doing business for that option are both complete mysteries. Because
Well, yeah.
if they decide not to have a training officer because it cost them too much and they were bidding to get a lower bid in so that way they could get the contract, so they didn't budget for a training officer,
Yeah.
they could lose ISO
Oh, yeah.
and go
yeah.
worse, or they could cost us more than what we cost now. You don't know what the cost is until you get bids for it. So really,
Yeah.
that's a complete question
Right.
mark. And so is it.
So
So that's a con for the board is the board would not have control over them. You would have oversight over the budget, depending on what you set up with them. But if they decide to go, yeah, it'd be all
yeah,
contract
you'd
language.
Write that into an RFP. That wouldn't. And I suppose in the real world of this, there would be if I were the not-for-profit, I would always have that sort of Damocles sort of hanging over my head,
Mhm.
that if I don't do what I'm supposed to do,
Right.
I could lose my.
We're
my
gonna assume
agreement.
they're coming and do the best job they can.
Oh, sure, no
But-
different than any fire department or any services. They come in with great expectations. And then, through no fault of their own, things just go bad. And to me, one of the big cons for really almost any of these is just finding people that want to do this, that still have that sort of community service feeling and know that from a financial standpoint, they're probably could do better in just a for-profit world. But so it is what it is.
Mhm.
So any other pros? So we've got we would have fire services would be one pro. Another pro would be that we would have little, if any, change in the cost of service, the insurance aspect of things. I suppose another pro is that the township is essentially supervisory at best over the operation of a fire department. So the township wouldn't have a sort of a day-to-day engagement in it, much like our current relationship with F&V, for example, that we don't have a day-to-day input in the operation of the DPW. And so therefore, we wouldn't have the sort of day-to-day operation of overseeing a fire department that would be contracted out.
I would say you should have that now.
But the fact of the matter is we do. And so, I mean, it's, we, just from a managerial standpoint, that's how it is. And so from a pro standpoint, it's just the sort of looking at the fire department more from a higher elevation than sort of street level, I guess, for lack of a better phrase.
I think as well, even for number two, the next one, but there's pros to it and there's cons.
I totally agree. I completely agree
I
with
can
you.
understand not having to micromanage and day-to-day stuff, but in the same respect, and I understand that when you say that things can be written into contracts, but how many times have we seen where there are negative things that happen if you lose that accountability and that authority over somebody that you're contracting with and that. So it's pro and con.
Oh, yeah, no doubt. And
The
so,
potential is there that it could.
You don't have the township would all of a sudden not be responsible for long-term pensions.
we wouldn't have any of the personnel issues.
You don't have.
But you don't have that, we don't have like.
We don't have that now anyway.
Yeah, I know we don't have legacy costs, but we wouldn't have health insurance costs. We wouldn't have insurance costs. We wouldn't have all these other costs that would be the cost of the whoever the entity.
It just turned into, instead of having 5 line items, it turned into 1. Because instead of paying the insurance on its own line item, it would just all go into the payment to that entity. So
No, they would have to operate within the millage. That's how that would
if
work.
that's what they agree, I mean, if that's what they agree, again, that's the big unknown. If that's what they agree to, their prices, we don't set a private company's price. They set their price and come to us with it,
Okay, so no health insurance costs, no union operations.
You don't know that.
Yeah, I would.
No, if a private company, they can have a union in a
Would be
private
their
company.
issue.
That's their issue.
Yeah.
So I'm not trying.
No,
We're not
no,
running.
Right, I understand what you're saying. I'm looking at it from another point of view of, you say there's no health insurance cost. With that title, yes, but that's gonna
That's their-
transfer into whatever money they bid on that. It's all the same, it's
Right.
the same numbers just crammed into one line item instead of spread out.
You're missing the bigger picture. They may have all of those things. They may have health
Right, yeah.
insurance. They may have a union. They may have legacy costs. They may have all of these ancillary costs of doing business.
But they're
But
gonna,
they gotta fit it into their
right,
budget.
they're gonna wrap it into the number that they bid on doing the job for.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But those burdens wouldn't be ours. We wouldn't negotiate the health insurance costs. We wouldn't negotiate any of those sorts of things. And so that just becomes a cost of doing business for whomever was doing it, no differently than F&V. I suspect they probably have an employee benefits department that is would choke whatever employee benefits department that we would have, but it's baked in to their operational costs. Any, Chad, anything? Bev? Okay.
Next one.
And I'm sure that once we think about this thing a little bit more, we can probably come up with other issues. And in fact, honestly, that's one of the things that I was going to do this morning was to sort of think about it a little bit more, make a couple of phone calls, etc. So the next line item, or the next item on the agenda, where we've got contractor combined with other municipalities. Now, this one could easily be, you could easily break this out into another whole other subsection, or you could make it its own subsection. That could include whether there was whether it was contracted out, whether it was through some mutual agreement, contractual agreement, in this case, the city or any other outlying municipality, or for that matter, I suppose you could either throw into this section, although it would probably be cleaner if you put it into its own section, would be that of establishing a fire authority, fire and emergency services authority of some sort. Because at that point, like with a combined or contracted service, but mostly combined, I would think, is that you get the economy of scale that starts to build in and cost saving sort of, this theoretically anyway, would become the benefit of the group. So whereas if you had a fire authority made up of 8 or 9 municipalities, in theory, you have even a greater benefit. Whether or not a authority would do much in terms of improving ISO ratings would be tough, probably. I don't know how Wilson or Green, Maple Ridge, or any of those places would improve the fire rating unless they had a lot better water services. And so that would be a very long-term thing. But let's not go there right now. Let's just stick with the combining or contracting. So one of the pros, again, to the township would be, actually, I see this as a pro and a con. On the surface, there would be a likely savings that would be probably closer to the fire millage. So I see that in the short term as a pro. But I'll talk on the other side in a second here. So conversely, if the township were to go in that direction, and if we didn't analyze this closely within a relatively short period of time, I would say under 10 years, that the cost of the millage, and this also assumes the millage would be removed. And so if there was say a fixed cost of say 450,000 or just whatever number you want to throw there, and if built into that agreement, that financial wing of it was some sort of an inflationary adjustment, say 2% or 2.5% or some arbitrary percentage. If you do the math on, let's say, a 450 or 500,000 or again, whatever number it is, and if you extrapolate that out over a few years, we find ourselves in no different a place than we find ourselves currently, except for the fact that in whatever number of years it is, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years, in that period of time, we go from staffed or partially staffed to not staffed to older equipment, and now we're going into the general fund to fund the contracted services without much ability to negotiate those costs of services. And depending upon the written escape clause in the contract, it could be a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year escape clause. And in that period of time, then the township would have to get back into the fire business. And we would be starting essentially from scratch. We would have older equipment. We would have perhaps a lack of employees. There are a myriad of cons in my mind to what was presented to the township. So that would certainly be a con to me over a protracted period of time. So therefore, a pro would be to write a contract in such a way that it would be pinned to something more tangible, meaning establish through the assessing department or whatever, some kind of a formula that would be based upon assessed value. So that if the assessed valuation turns out to be X and a factor of X becomes the cost of fire services or fire and EMS type services, then that number stays constant. And so that if the assessed evaluation of the Charter Township of Alpena goes up, then so does the cost of fire services go up in proportion to that factor. Follow me? Conversely, if a large business decided to close its doors or move, that means the assessed evaluation is going to go down rather substantially right off the bat. And if we have this static number, then we get into the general fund even quicker. So that there would be an incentive for to watch that, because whomever the contracted entity was, would know going in that if there was a reduction in our assessed evaluation for whatever reason, that factor remains static. And it would stay static in perpetuity. Until such time, at least anyway, that there was some sort of a written agreement amongst any of those entities that would be involved in that, whether that was an authority or not, because it's same applies to the authority. The benefit of and I'm sorry to birdwalk a little bit here, the benefit of an authority, in my estimation, would be the law of large numbers. Now we go from this population to this population. And if we use the same formula of assessed evaluation, then the benefit remains equal across the board. Would it be that the larger municipality would tend to carry the smaller municipality? Yeah, but that's sort of the benefit of the economy of scale. You know, the smaller municipality benefits from the larger municipality, but they both do.
That automatically happens already.
Exactly.
I mean, that's
Yeah, exactly. And so
Green Township doesn't have a Walmart, you know.
but they have a lot of agriculture.
Right, we don't, you know. well, we
And
kinda- we
so
have 50-50, but-
they,
Yep.
you know, we wash each other's back, so to speak. You know, the agricultural operation probably gonna remain. Whereas Walmart could say, we're out of here. And also the box stores get some tax benefit that, you know, the local guy doesn't get.
Mhm.
And so they're not as huge an impact. I was thinking something like an Omni that went, you know what, Tennessee looks pretty good. And so all of their operations moves to Tennessee.
That's a lot of property.
A lot.
Mhm.
And that would impact many municipalities. So getting back to the combined or contracted, not only do I see the potential savings, but I literally can draw an arrow over to the con and see the opposite of that too. And so if not operated properly, that would just be a flat wash.
Right, that's my challenge with the contract with the city in particular, is the history that we've had with the city. that we have with us, with water.
Court of Appeals.
You know, that's the, you know, you can get it in a contract. you know. That's the challenge, how do we keep a contract perpetual? I think that's a good idea, and I think the originator, the water department had a usage. However, was that original contract? Now,
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the long-term history of that. Cash, you probably have a better handle on that than I do, but I suppose this is what happens when you fail to plan,
Right.
you know? And so that's why,
I mean, long term, I think the township is gonna grow a whole lot easier than the city. There's no land inside the city.
The their council members have admitted they cannot grow because
Right.
they're surrounded by the township or the water.
Right, all of our growth is happening around our concern and needs to be our challenge. So an assessed value of paper just really makes sense.
well, I think it does from my way of thinking. I just don't know how you could take and frankly, it would have been nice had we had and this is where I get a little bit weak on these sorts of things, but it would have been better. And we wouldn't be sitting at this table had we had long-range thinking that would have been tied more to what our revenue stream is. So I don't know exactly how to do that. And I suspect there are smarter people than me that can figure that sort of stuff out, but it only seems reasonable to me to have some tie to what we earn to what it costs to do business. But maybe I've been in business too long. I don't know. And yes, I do in fact recognize that the value of the service can outweigh the cost of doing business. I understand that. And so, and clearly I recognize that, otherwise we wouldn't have taken $200,000 out of the roads to fund the fire department. So I'm on board with that, but you can only do that so long. That's the problem. You can't let the roads deteriorate to the point where the fire trucks can't get to the property. And so you have to have this balance. You just have to do it. And so it's just a matter of figuring out how to realistically do that and keep in place costs. So again, another pro would be that we wouldn't have to deal with any of the ancillary costs of running a fire department if it was contracted out. Somebody would bake that into their cost of doing business.
You brought up something earlier that I waited till this point to bring it up just because it makes sense here, is you said that with the county, we have some sort of agreement that we have provide first responder services in
Yeah,
some capacity,
I
something.
believe, in Cashew, maybe you can. In
That's
fact,
the
I
one
think
I
it's,
just-
So question being, if we contract with the county ambulance service to park in our station, are we no longer providing a first responder, but because first responders are separate than the ambulance, right? Because even in the city, they respond a separate vehicle with separate employees in it as first responders to go with the ambulance to a call. So if we're up here and we are contracting 100% of our services, so you don't have those full timers to go on calls, are we then not providing that first responder service? That, I know it's a legal question, I guess.
yeah,
You'll get into the giggy weeds, but
if I follow your question, as I understand, and it looks like this is this is the agreement.
and I'm going off what they're
So-
doing now. They got two full timers sitting here with their ambulance. So, but if they go on a call, let's say there's a call in Presque Township, or there's a call in Maple Ridge, so this one goes to that. And now we have a call here. They're gonna send an ambulance from downtown for their county contract, for their transporting ambulance portion of the county contract. And if we're contracting our fire department out to them, I mean, it is the township responsible for this contract, or is whoever we pay to run the service responsible for this contract? Does that make sense? Like,
It does
is the
make
township
sense.
liable that you're not fielding first responders in compliance with the contract or compliance with the agreement contract, whatever it's called? Because if you're contracted to the city and the city sends first responders, that's not the township, that's them backfilling their stations, backfilling their contract.
Or ALS portion.
Their ALS portion of the transporting side of this contract,
That's where-
not the
that's
first
where-
responder side.
That's where our paid on call.
So
Our
what,
paid on calls are our first responders. And then through mutual aid, you don't have response for first responders. That's all that is. I haven't read this, obviously.
I haven't read the whole thing yet.
so I think the
what you're
answer,
Trying to say is then at this point in time, if we're looking at a contract, then we're contracting for our portion of responsibility. What I hear you saying is that the possibility is that then our first response, I mean, how will that look at the contract?
so I think the easy answer to that, without looking into it very closely, is that, and a potential con would be, would we potentially be in breach of contract with the county of Bellevue? And if so, what does that look like? So maybe
Well,
that's,
and I think you look at the other aspect, to make it simpler, is you're double paying for services, because
Mhm.
the county millage for the ambulance is already being taken care of, so they have to provide that service to the whole county no matter what. But just by parking them here, yes, that probably the benefit is to get maybe a quicker response time, maybe to some areas.
Yeah,
Some
some areas,
areas.
yes.
But we're already paying for that.
But
So
the
we're double
entire,
paying.
the entire township, including Southside's taxpayers, are paying for twice for an ambulance to respond to their home when they call 911.
That falls into what I've been saying all along, prior to January 1st. There were 4 people that showed up at my door that were assured, and now there's 2 people that can show up, is my understanding.
so I think the bigger question, as Cash has pointed out, and again, a con to, or a potential, the word, I don't like the word con in this particular example, but But, so the question becomes, in the contract cost, are the residents, the property owners of the township duplicating its cost of doing business if the contract provides for, let's go to the city as the example, because it's the only one that we really have. If the city's cost of whatever it was, 400 and some $1,000 to provide these services, including a couple of ALS paramedics, aren't we already paying for that in the countywide millage? And if we're paying for that in the countywide millage, would it be taxation without representation if it's done again, through a contract? Now, to me, that would be worth writing out of a contract or clarifying in a contract, because if whoever's sitting here being paid through the millage, which is essentially what you're saying, then why wouldn't you extract those costs of that employee benefit out of the contract, because you're already getting paid for it? That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
And so I think that is a very reasonable question, and one that I'm not sure has been explored, and that's why. That's one of the reasons why I thought if we could dissect this fire service agreement, EMS services agreement, because outside of and correct me if I'm wrong, outside of the medical first responders, it's my understanding that in order to, for lack of a better phrase, participate in the countywide ambulance services, each participating municipality has to at least have medical first responders. Is that what I
And
understand?
fire services.
Pardon me?
And fire services.
And fire services? All right, so is there any municipality in Alpena County that has a fire department? So Wilson, Long Rapids, Green,
The
Alpena.
only oddity would be Wellington Township, but they
Yeah,
have
they've got.
Long
they've
Rapids
got a different-
Township.
Right. so
They
I'm
cover
only-
both, so
Only those that have a fire department. So Maple Ridge,
Mhm.
Alpena, Wilson, and Green, I believe. are the only-
Sanborn.
Sanborn's Alcona County, isn't it?
Nope.
Oh, that's Alpena? Okay.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
They cover some of Alcona, but they're
And so
in Alpena.
all of those municipalities have at least a medical first responder, right?
Yes.
Okay. And so is it distinguishable between a fire department and medical first responder? So I know that some of those guys have people that are strictly volunteer firemen that really aren't medical first responders. And then we have medical first responders and a fire department.
Can you rephrase that question?
So-
I think
Like
what he's saying
indistinguishable
is, like,
meaning-
for us, we have EMTs, right? Most of these volunteer departments, are they EMTs or just MFI?
I'm not 100% sure who's who, but I know a lot of them are MFR licensed departments.
Most of them have at least one or two EMTs on staff, but by license are responding at a medical first responder level.
All right, that's my question.
My explanation by that is, it's for instance, take, for example, Chris and I are both veteran paramedics. Within the township of Alpena, we respond as EMT.
Okay,
The genesis of that, why they do that is when you have a license, whatever license level you're licensed at, you have to guarantee you're going to get at least one at that license level to respond to the call. Like for instance, in Alpena Township, we are BLS non-transfer, and we have to provide at least one EMT to go to a medical call. If just an MFR goes to that medical call, we're in breach of our license requirements by the state standards. So because the other departments are 100% paid on call, or paid a volunteer, whatever you want to call it, they don't have any full-time staff. They choose to be, I'm not going to speak for everyone, but one general idea is they choose to stay MFR because at least they can, everyone's MFR, even though I have a couple EMTs, so we could go basic, but then we'd have to guarantee those EMTs showed up, and we can't do that because we're rural, they work in town, whatever reason they have. So they stay at an MFR level because they can't maintain that state requirement, where fortunately for the township, we have full-time staff, so we can maintain a higher licensure level because of that.
But, okay, thank you for that, but, and I will read this agreement, but does the agreement call for MFR?
That's my understanding. It's right here on this page. So
What page are you on?
right on the first one, whereas parties anticipate continued future demand for such
Are you on the
firefighting.
mutual aid one?
Yeah,
Yeah,
what are you reading from?
just on the first page.
What document?
We have
Um,
two,
The mutual aid agreement.
mutual aid. That's the Thunder Bay Firefighters Association.
So now therefore the parties hereby agree that firefighting, rescue and MFR level EMS services to one another are subject to the following conditions and goes down. But again, am I reading that correct? That it's a tiered system for that reason, for the reason how we operate, because they contract with the city for ALS. And everybody else basically is required to be MFR to support that system. So until the system actually changes, I think this is what we're in. This is the system we operate in. We actually offer a higher level of service as a township than we're required. to have EMT.
We are the only township in the county that offers basic level. The rest of them offer with the exception of the city, who has the contracts to.
So point of clarification too, in EMS, like Dave said, Dave and I are paramedics. We can operate at a lower level, but a lower level cannot operate at a higher level. So therefore, if the mutual aid agreement requires MFR, EMT satisfies the MFR requirement. It's above and beyond, yes, but it would be if they required EMT, you couldn't have MFRs, but you could have ALS. ALS will cover EMT as well as EMTs. So it's that type of system. So we're not violating anything by being EMT.
Yeah.
Because that supersedes what they have, so it's better than what they have. Just point of clarification on that, in case that was a
All right,
question.
well, that's definitely something for us to read and try to understand each one of those agreements. Because I think that will come back to us in virtually any one of these scenarios.
Who is, just on void of knowledge, who is Thunder Bay Firefighters Association? Governmental, is it?
Not
What- I don't-
nonprofit.
It's
Interdepartmental.
so most of the departments in the area are part of it. The area includes Alpena County, plus East Grand Lake, Presque Isle Township, Hillman, Alcona Township. I might be South Shore. I might be missing one or two, but it includes more than just the county. It's
I
yeah,
mean, I understand.
in the city, and
And there's like.
it's an association, meaning we
there's like
use it for,
bylaws, it's an
yeah.
official, like,
They have meetings they go to, and
Thank you. That was I was making.
for a long time,
something
they
that
were
I
in
did
charge
not
of
hear.
providing training for all the fire departments, and in the association, they would host the training itself, so we could all go and be part of it. They would also do all the mutual aid agreements were kind of through that group, so that way everyone had a seat at the table to talk about the mutual aid agreements. And
So there's clear authority behind it.
And Dave, is there a superseding agreement that lays out the structure for our EMS in the county? like how the system tiered and how it operates? Is there a superseding document to?
Document, my understanding is that's a good question, because the way this is all supposed to operate is, we have our paramedic license, the city does, others have basic EMT, some have MFR, some are specialists. None of us can practice in that scope unless we are doing it under the authority of medical control. Example, anything that the city paramedics do, Christian, I do EMT, anybody else does MFR, it's all done under the auspices of Dr. Buchan's Northeast Medical Control License. When I hired in up here back in '93, it explained to me that prior in the early 92 when they went ALS, it had been basic life support. In '92 it was stood up to advanced. And that medical control at that time wanted a tiered system, and that was done through what you guys just read here, the Thunder Bay had a little bit to do with it. And the idea was, yes, the city would provide paramedics that we call throughout the county, but they were depending upon each individual township fire department to provide that first tier of first response. Get somebody there within 5 minutes that did a history, page, vitals, size up the scene, so to speak, let the medics know coming. So, but as far as a document, and again, does that mean that Dr. Bucci, whoever is medical control, they will hire? And this just to get off in a little bit into left field, because there are a lot of systems that run basic EMT paramedic, which is something the city is transitioning toward. 10, 15 years ago, that they wouldn't even entertain that idea. That's too bad. But again, that's all with the direction. Say, well, yes, it's okay to run a something Steve said earlier that cuts off is I wanted to point out to everybody, as is my understanding, is we are supposed to be running a tiered system within the county. And if Alpena Township were to step back from that, you would be, unless you contracted with somebody, you would be the only township in the county that didn't offer medical first response to its citizens. And at one point in time, it was like that. There was a period of time between 92 and 2005, I think, where there was, Alpena Township was doing fire response only. There was no medical first response. And I think it was pointed out back then that, hey, you guys realize you're the only township that's not offering this to its citizens, and that's when the department then moved into and started doing medical first response out of the fire department. So,
and it's worth saying, it's not just the peer pressure, it's also because of where the whole country was shifting towards this, and because of liabilities of, well, you're the government agency, this is the standard practice for municipalities, and you're not following the standard, so now you're an outlier, so now you need to be looked at. Why is this? So for litigation purposes too, that helped push this whole EMS evolution countrywide, statewide, to go from, well, we'll just provide, I mean, when I was starting EMS, I met people who literally had a CPR card that was your medic license to run out in the field, was just AHA or Red Cross would give you a CPR first aid card. And that was people who showed up in funeral home hearses to, you'd either go to the funeral home if it went bad, or you go to the hospital if it went good. Chad knows that history from the funeral side. Well, it's it's progressed from there, and it's not, I mean, this all came out of like the Vietnam era, 70s, 80s. So it's not, it's kind of a newer, it's not like the fire department where we've been around forever and we're dinosaurs. It's the EMS side is kind of a newer trend in the grand scheme.
Well, as I see it on like my side, you know, and my job, you know, those worst case scenarios, like even a heart attack, there's not enough people, if we're contracted and you have 2 people coming, there's not enough people to meet the need. A major car accident, any type of terrorist event, there's not enough resources. Even the combining the 2 departments. You know, like when we had 2 years ago, when I had a semi roll over on 32. I mean, I talked about every unit, everybody we had, and it was just a simple rollover.
That reminds me of, I want to bring up a big con to this
Well,
whole.
I just saw that, I just heard that as one. So,
Yeah.
so what I'm hearing is that not enough resources to provide services in the event of a worst case scenario.
And I think we've all known that in the police and fire areas. I mean, that's, there's not enough resources here. Do we have that many?
And a specific con on that, even with this, what we have now is when a certain municipality took over contracted services for our north side, they did not increase their staffing. We lost 4 people. The city gained 3 of those 4, but the city already had holes from their normal staffing. They did not increase staffing, they merely backfilled opening positions that they had for years and years and years in the past. It's not a new position. So in totality, and net gain was a loss for the area of first responders. There was no gain. I mean, I know, see, we were back to full staffing. That's great. You were at full staffing 2, 3, 4 years ago, whenever you were at full staffing. You're at the same level now, 2, 3, 4 years later, you have not increased staffing. I believe populations have increased since then. I believe, you know, so they're not, even on their own side, which is their own business, and I'm not telling them how to run it, I'm just stating they haven't been keeping up with their growth. And now we're expecting them to take over 150 some square miles of territory plus another 20,000 residents without growing their own size of their department.
All right,
So that would be something you'd want to look at
so
in
we
a
can
future
write
contract as
that.
well. Is
we can write that down. And so in the interest of time, as I said, I'd be out of, we try to get out of here a little after 9, but I pushed it forward a little bit. So let's try to, if it's okay with everybody else, I just soon end here so that we can move forward on our next time. So I think I would like to add to number 5 on the, is a, if possible, a countywide fire authority as another option. I have no idea how that would work or if it would even be reasonable as to whether or not any of the outlying townships, or for that matter, the city, would entertain the notion of a fire authority for this area.
Could we add an additional one?
Sure.
Maybe a hybrid
Sure.
where, like we were just talking, maybe we had the city come in our building with a paramedic, we provide a EMT. But that would benefit them and benefit us. But I'm
What
just
do we call that?
just a hybrid maybe?
Okay.
Yeah, and now, just to like give us, like, have us a 1 staff member, so we can, 1 township, 1 city staff member with staff and ambulance or fire truck, whatever, become a station.
Yeah. Just, I mean, just a thought, you know, something,
The whole purpose, that's the whole purpose of why we're in this room together.
There are so many different models. City medic with the township firefighter. Township firefighter with someone from Michigan. I really want to address the EMS or being mounted. And that's something I wanted to put out to you guys, and then that you as a board. It's kind of in the back of my mind. One of my observations has been, I think you guys all know that I'm very, but I want you guys to
I've
understand.
kind of understood that.
Yeah, that, did you pick up on
But
that?
thanks for clarifying.
You guys do know that as the board, you can direct and contractual. I'll just say this, what I've seen is it's not been so much a, Bill, this is what we want, this is how great, how can you get as your bill, just tell us what you that there's so many unknowns. That's why I'm saying this is because we're countering like Chris and I with if you guys say, well, you know, if the city can only get, you won't have the same coverage. If you direct and see, and that's all part of the comment I had made at a prior board meeting. Let's see that. Let's see if you tell them, yeah, we want a proposal for you to take over, but under these conditions, we will have a minimum of one person at both stations. You will not unman or close. The bridge will be dedicated. That changes the whole dynamic of things coming in and saying, yeah, I can put 2 people in, but they're not going to be dedicated. I can pull them on anytime I want. So you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, and
So
I think we
this
should
is
try,
This is what
try and
you're
do
saying
some
about-
of that work here. I think would be great if we could.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I would, and we're not,
Compare apples to apples,
Yeah.
not apples to oranges.
because we're not totally, we're not against looking at, you know, different dynamics and.
Well, and I'm not trying to look at today or tomorrow. I'm trying to look 5, 10 years down the road.
Yeah.
And this township is gonna expand. We know that. So we're fooling ourselves if we're thinking it's not. And the cost will go up of everything. It doesn't matter what we're doing. It's going up.
And that's why, you know, I've said sarcastically. Sure, you know, I'm willing to look at them. But, and my opinion is I believe cash, guys, that in the next 10 to 15 years, the township is gonna be larger. In the city, we're gonna have more population, we're gonna have tax base, we're gonna have more infrastructure. So.
Well, I think these are good things. This is exactly where I'd like to see this go. And I'd like to delineate it exactly the way we are, commit it to writing, look at the options and try to conclude from those. And it doesn't necessarily mean that any one of these is the best. It could mean that a combination of some of these are best. I like the idea of having that long-term plan. I like the idea of being able to control part of our destiny. I like those things, but I also am a realist, and I also recognize that as state revenue sharing changes, we will have to adapt to those changes. We have no choice. And so it has to be a living document. That's one of the reasons why I thought the tying something to a assessed evaluation looked good today as well as 20 years from now. And so, and there's no guarantee that the township of Alpena is going to grow. Guaranteed.
Until like state mandates change or.
Whatever, yeah, whatever, just try to bake it in. And yeah, and so let's, when do we want to try to get together again? Want to try, let's see, Tuesday morning at Monday? Or do you want to do this, weekly?
But how fast
I figure we're gonna need 3 or 4 more meetings.
I personally would rather just go ahead and do it.
But me too, me too. I'd rather not do it twice a week. But,
No, no,
but
I
I'm
just
okay with that. If you want to meet Mondays at 7:30, this time I'll actually get the agenda correct. And the agenda really won't change at all. At least I don't foresee it changing. I'll amend the agenda to item 5 and 6 to include authority or a hybrid. But outside of that, I won't change it at all. And so, let's see, calendar.
Just keep moving down.
So that's the 12th, April 12th at 7:30. Yeah. I know it's a conceptual idea that is long overdue. That seem reasonable?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and if either one of you guys can't make it, then we can always Zoom y'all in. All right. Muchos gracias, amigos and amigas.